Okay, so this is a test shot. Um, Welcome to my channel. I don't really know what the purpose is yet. But basically, I have managed to finish up my workshop. So this is going to be kind of a diary, I guess, of my ongoing project to build a Death Corps of Krieg type army. I've acquired a Photon S resin printer. I've acquired paints, brushes, and everything I need to get going. And this very, very basic setup, which is basically just a tripod with my phone on it and a headset. So, as I mentioned, this is going to be kind of a diary walking through kind of the process of building the army and painting the army and printing the army and my experiences going through that. I don't know how many people are going to be interested in this, but it is mostly made for my own pleasure, I guess. So this was one of the first miniatures I painted. You see, I don't know how well the details will come up here, but I'll try and get it close to the camera and see if the camera will focus. I'm going to fiddle a little bit with the setup. I think I'll try and use OBS to connect my phone so I can have multiple camera angles and a bit nicer layout and this kind of stuff, but that is going to be down the line. As mentioned, it's just a test. So basically the idea is that I'm going to build this army based on the V-Core models. I will probably put a link to the creators of these models down in the description. It's Maker's Cult. They have Patreon. You sign up, you pay a relatively small fee, and you get like monthly packs. And you can also, if you missed monthly packs, you can go back and buy components individually. It's quite a neat setup they have, and the models are very high quality. So as for my first print, I'm fairly happy with the level of detail. This is the first model I ever printed. So the Photon is really simple to actually get good results on. And I think I'm not gonna fiddle about too much with the details because I'm fairly happy with how it went. There's some flashing at certain points. I don't really know why. I think it might be the curing process, which I'm going to probably fiddle a bit more with. But so far so good. So I've printed 4 lieutenants. That was what I could fit on one build plate. Or sergeants, I should say, right? They're not gonna be lieutenants, I think, in the army, but they're flexible, right? So it doesn't really matter. This guy I haven't put on the arm yet, but he's a kind of a less gun chainsword kind of guy. Wrong chainsword. There we go. Right chainsword. So anyway, as for the workshop, the setup is not exactly complete yet. I am going to have to kind of level out the printer so it's on a firm surface. Everything in the workshop has been built from recycled wood and that kind of stuff because I'm a cheap bastard, right? And the result is that while the table itself is level, the individual boards that make up the table are kind of slightly shifted. And that means that the printer can wobble a little bit. What I'm gonna do, I think, is I've put a plain wood plate there, and then I'm gonna use some of this. This is a mouse mat, basically, underneath to stabilize it, so that the mouse pad can give in the areas where there is a pressure differential between the sides, right? So there's some small kinks like that to work out. There's probably something with the lighting that I will have to improve on. But overall, I'm fairly happy with how things went. So I've already, because this workshop has been kind of a long running project, I've already kind of worked out, and these are just my notes, right? I've kind of worked out the idea for the army, what it's going to be based on, why it is not exactly deathcore, because obviously the deathcore models from Games Workshop or Forge World are prohibitively expensive. So this V constant is going to be based on a world, I'm just going to call it Volkmar, I think, that the deathcore pacified, right? It went into some sort of rebellion, the deathcore was sent to bring them back into line, and they have taken up much of the creed of the deathcore, the call of sacrifice and all this kind of stuff, but they have a very specific way of dealing with the society and how it's structured, and I've kind of based a lot of the fluff around a mix between kind of Nordic and Celtic societal structures. So it's going to be a mix of a family system where your title and your caste kind of decides where you are in society, all the way from being a thrall to being the regent of the König of the society. So I've kind of like figured out how I would structure that society, how it would function, how the titles and language works, how voting and democracy works, because it is nominally democratic in some ways, except that only certain parts of society has the right to vote and all this kind of stuff. So I've kind of worked out how you become a thrall, for example. So a thrall, of course, is a slave class. How does this slave class function? What can land you in that kind of position? What are the different ranks between in the families? The families I've called shoals, SIOLs. So shoal is basically a collection of families under the head of an elected laird or lord, called in this society shoalords, and they represent kind of what would be the house of the society, the house of representative, right? It's the shoalords are in what's called a ting. The ting, which is this house, then elects actually the king. So it's an elective democracy based on the families selecting heads for their groups of families, and the heads of those groups of families, or septs or shoals, then elects the king. But there are certain entry requirements to become a member of a shoal, or become a showman, as I call it, and all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of details I've already worked out, and of course a lot of details that I haven't. But I'm very excited to kind of build up this fluff from ground up. How does society work? What are the different classes? What do they do? How is that represented in the army? For example, if you are one of these guys, right? This guy would be a showman, right? So a citizen with franchise and voting rights, and he would also be a herseer, or a lieutenant, right? Junior officer in the society, and that gives him certain rights. He will most likely be an owner of land, and owners of land is in themselves a caste of society, right? So there's social mobility in that you can actually move from being a thrall and upwards into society, but there are certain requirements for it. And for example, you can go from an unlanded freeborn man, or a thane, to become a husthane, like this guy. He probably owns land, he probably has more than 10 years of service in the military and so on. and from that he might actually become a noble at some point, and he could even be elected as a Skjoldard at some point if if the family is within his Skjold decides to vote for him. So this, I don't know. I like to build up these kind of stories and ways these societies will function, and it, you know. So as I build the society and the structure and the ideas about how these guys think, it will help me in deciding how to build the army. Now I'm thinking that whereas the Death Corps is all about mass infantry, this army here is going to be much more elite. And I have some ideas about how that can work on the tabletop, because the Guard is of course not very well known for being an elite force, unless you go the route of Scions, and I'm not going to use Scions that much. Instead, I will probably use veteran squads a lot more, but I might bring in some Scions. But it's going to be a fairly elite force. They're probably going to be mechanized. And I have some ideas on how to make that work within the game. Because of course, Mechanized Guard has had a tough time in 9th, but recent changes have come out, and I think like that is the way I like to play. I like to play Mechanized Guard, and they're gonna have their ups and downs. They're not always gonna be the most effective force, but at the end of the day, that is the way with all armies. So you just have to kind of build what you like to play, and sometimes you're going to be strong, sometimes you're going to be weak, and you're just going to have to live with that. Because if you constantly chase the meta, well, either you need a lot of time to paint your armies, or you need to buy painted armies, or whatever, become a Waka player or whatever. But I think it's much more fruitful to pick something you love, and just go for that, right? And see how things go from there. Anyway, I think that's it for the first short introduction. I think next time I'm gonna kind of try and start painting, and perhaps with a little bit better setup. I just wanted to see what the quality was gonna be like on this camera. I am not a big fan of having to go out and buy a good mic and a good camera and a very dedicated setup, because frankly I don't have the money to do that, and as I said, this is mostly for my own benefit, just to kind of put words to ideas, and also to keep myself motivated, right? Because we all know that sometimes you start building an army and you kind of lose motivation down the line. And I might also paint some other stuff on this channel. I have a bunch of Warlord games, bolt action figures that I have to paint. I have some Waffen-SS and some Russians I need to get painted as well. So I might get into that, just to get a break from painting the same stuff over and over again. I might have to, for this army, paint something like 100, 200 miniatures, and it will probably take at least a year, because I don't have that much time to paint. And I also need to print it, and I might run into problems, and you want to have more miniatures that you're actually going to use in a game, because you want to have that flexibility to kind of like mix and match your units a little bit. But enough about that. Thank you all very much for watching. I assume there's not going to be that many people watching this, but at any rate, thank you, and see you later.